We're back, episode 4, Manic and Chill, August 2nd, 2020. Back with at Shane is the worst, Shane Manila from Dynasty Trades HQ. I'm Charles Chill, FFB, Dynasty and Chill. Today we're going to be talking some roster construction. Shane, we're about just shy of 6 weeks from the beginning of the NFL season. Knock on wood. You never know. It could get delayed. But just roster construction in general, I think it's going to be really important this year, how you allocate your roster spots. And we can have a discussion talking all types of formats, super flex, 2 quarterback, 2 tight end, really shallow, really deep, maybe some FFPC type rosters, or some of the crazy ones like that you're in, 16 teams with 35 roster spots where really anybody usable is already owned. So let's just talk about that real quick before we even go into specific formats. How much is roster?
I like that you said the leagues that I'm in. Like you're not in the same crazy ass leagues. But
between the two of us, we pretty much have between the two of us, we have every single league base covered. I would guess from contract leagues, salary cap leagues, super deep leagues, crazy scoring. I mean, we can probably have we can't cover every single one of them on this show, but just in general, how much more have you thought about? Like, hey, what am I doing with the back end of my rosters this year versus past years?
I spent way too much time on it. Usually now I'm cutting guys that I'm like, he's not going to have a job, and I'm looking for guys that usually rookies or undrafted free agents, but generally rookies. Like, hey, this guy might have a path. But now I'm not cutting anyone, just because I don't know who I might pick up is going to come down with COVID. I don't know if they're going to opt out. So it feels like I'm playing whack-a-mole if I just start cutting guys right now. I'm spending a lot more time thinking about the IR, obviously, going through leagues and going, well, Devin Funchess, there's a free spot. I think it's important as soon as you get these opt-outs that, if your commissioner has already made it so that you can put these guys on IR, you immediately put them on IR and pick someone up.
Yep.
Now's not the time to have empty roster spots. Now's not the time to be holding on to, Terrell Owens, as you'll still see in some leagues, like, as a lark, someone thinks it's funny to keep Terrell Owens on the back of their roster because who's ever going to need that 30th roster spot, right? Well, this is the year you're going to need that 30th roster spot. Guys like AB, who I don't think is ever actually going to play again. I might go ahead and swap him for a pick just so I can, then pick up another player and keep that flexibility on the back of my roster. But just kind of like we spoke last week, it's being flexible and it's being on top of it. This isn't the year that you can go, I'm going to look at my rosters, 2 weeks before the start of the season to clean up the back of it, which is, I do that all the time. I'm guilty of that. I won't lie. Generally regular year, I'm like, well, my 30th roster spot's probably not going to matter. Well, this year, my 30th roster spot, there's a good chance he's going to be my wide receiver 2 1 week. So you definitely have to pay more attention to it and be more proactive than I normally would be.
You brought up a great point that I think you need to know. This is a time where you maybe not be obsessive like me, where I can probably tell you my league settings in every single league if you just tell me the league name. But you got to know your settings. You got to know. A lot of my leagues have already passed rules where it's like unlimited IRs, or the holdout players can go IRs, or all of the players that are just out can go on IR. So if you can know those settings going in, there's some teams where I've already gone in and placed like 8 guys on IR. Corey Davis is listed as out on MFL. Why? Who knows? He haven't even started training camp, but he's out. So you know what? If I can stash him on IR for a month and just pick up a player during the next waiver run, you got to know your settings. How many IR spots are there? Taxi spots, winter waivers. If you have weekly waivers, that's way different than if you don't have any waivers for the next month. Like, I'm with you. If you have no waivers for the next month, you really don't have to make any decisions. There's no reason to cut anybody until you kind of see what happens with them, and then you'll know exactly who to cut before the season starts. But just in general, you have to know your settings. I'm with you. I go through, I kind of pay attention to, there's many sites, DLF has one, but there's a bunch out there where they're tracking, who's been placed on IR or who's out. I go through maybe once or twice a week, at least at the end of the week, I'll go through all my teams and just I'll click on the IR, tab on each team and just see if there's anybody I can deactivate. And that's a free roster spot. And then just throw in a waiver claim. I honestly don't even care who the players are at this point, right? You just want to fill up the spots with, What would you say this year? Let's transition to specifically super flex leagues that are just average depth, maybe 25, 28 roster spots. I've found myself going, what backup quarterbacks do I know are going to be backups? Is Nick Mullins on the waiver wire? Is Robert Griffin on the waiver wire? Brett Hundley? Those kind of guys that are in like good offenses or good systems that could prop them up if they ever had to play. I'm actually adding those guys, and I'm starting to drop. It sucks because this was a really good draft class, right? 2020, really good draft class. There's a ton of these receivers that are in like the round 5, 6, 7, like the Hightowers, Quez Watkins, Moonies. Like I love having those type of players on my back end of my teams. But I'm sitting there going like, would I rather have RG3 if I have Lamar Jackson or, Quez Watkins or James Prochet? So you have to make some of those tough decisions. We don't have any buzz with these rookies this year. So they either make the final roster or they don't, but there's not going to be a lot of flip value for them as there would have been in prior seasons.
Yeah, years past, you could kind of shoot with a shotgun. You didn't really need to drill down as much as you might this year. Just for instance, you were talking about John Hightower. Normal circumstances, I just probably look at the roster setup and go, okay, I can hold on to him. Without digging too deep, actually. If I just go, all right, well, the Eagles drafted him. He's a wide receiver. I'll hold on to him. But now you do have to dig into the roster situations. It just so happens based on what's happened with the Eagles, I can hold on to him with, Goodwin, opting out and Jeffrey being injured. But yeah, if given the choice between a backup quarterback and a guy like that in a super flex, as much as I love project guys as everyone else, he's gone. If you don't have a taxi squad, a lot of these guys are going to be floating out there. We're going to see so many guys on the waiver wire that under normal circumstances, we just wouldn't. So it's going to be interesting to see. I know not a lot of leagues are expanding the actual roster sizes, but they might expand the IR, but it's all spots. But like you said, you can't cut people right now. You just can't. Like normally, I'm going through there and I'm like, hey, this 4th string tight end, I'm cutting him because there's no way he's going to play. I don't know. I have no idea if he's going to play this year. Now, if given the choice in a super flex between any quarterback with a pulse, like we were talking off air, like Chase Daniel, or, say a Rico Gathers type player. I'm going to be picking up Chase Daniel and calling it a day and giving up on Rico Gathers. And just Nick Mullins, just going through my leagues now. Yeah, he's pretty much owned absolutely in every super flex league. He's sitting out there on a couple of those. Guess who's going to pick him up? This guy.
Well, and I mean, the difference being, you mentioned John Hightower, and there's a bevy of receivers that fit in that round 5, 6, 7 range this year. There's probably like 12 to 15 guys that people are interested in there of differing levels. And so I'm not saying go in and drop every single one of those, but I think this year you only can afford to hold on to a couple that you really like. You can't afford to hold on 6 or 7 of them because that's the strength, is adding those guys. They have a really low hit rate. So if you can roster 8 of those guys, probably one of them is going to hit to where you can trade them for a second rounder or something during the season. But the strength is the fact that you can hold 8 of them and not have to guess which one it's going to be before the season. Whereas I think you're right, this year, there's so many of them, and there's going to be teams that are scrambling. It's not just quarterback, because here's the thing. We've seen over 50 quarterbacks start games the last 5 years. And I think this year it could get upwards into the 60s, depending on if players are just missing a week or 2 here and there because of a positive COVID test. So you're going to see more quarterbacks. So you're going to see more scrambling for people to own their backups. You're going to see more backups that get owned in general. I think most teams are rostering, instead of 2 or 3 quarterbacks, they may be rostering 5 or 6 this year. So that's a couple extra roster spots that are used up. But running backs, the same thing. I'm looking at this saying most years, if I have, Ty Montgomery is my 11th running back, I may drop him for Darnell Mooney or whatever one of those rookies I think could pop. But now I'm sitting there going like, if I can project this running back to just be on the 3 deep, active every week, he's 1 injury away from touches. And you never really know what's going to happen at the last second. So if I look at a running back and say, even if he's really not that good, if I can ever see a path where he gets 1 week of touches, that is worth more than stashing the 6th round rookie receiver. or, the late round tight end. I'm starting to drop those kind of guys. So I think running backs also this year are the second most important to have in these leagues. And obviously, if it's not super flex, they're the most important. So what are your thoughts on running backs? I mean, have you increased the number that you're rostering, or what?
Yeah, same thing. Like you said, you're smart. So I just do what you tell me most of the time. I just listen to what you say and I'm like, yeah, I'll do that too. And I'm going to take credit for it. Yeah, these onesies positions, you're definitely going to want to load up on. But unlike tight end, where the only place you're going to load up, I think, is in 2 tight end leagues. And if you're going to start 2 tight end league, I feel bad for you. I just do anyway, because there's not enough tight ends to legitimately, start 2 guys every week for every team in the league anyway. And then if COVID starts taking out any of these tight ends, and then just normal injuries, that's the other thing is like, we're just thinking in the terms of like, COVID's going to hit, probably going to take out a quarter of the league if we're lucky, just a quarter. Well, injuries pretty much decimate the league every year too. So it's I'm going to load up on running backs. Ty Montgomery, I will never cut, because as soon as he gets his shot, I swear to God, he's going to hit. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. He's only 4th on that depth chart. I think he's behind Kamara, Latavius Murray, and then Montgomery, right?
Yeah, he's 3rd. Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
And actually, he kind of fits in a way. I could see if Kamara was out, I actually could see him being a guy you could pull. I think they kind of see him as like a very poor man's Kamara. He could play a very similar role. So I kind of like him a little more this year, even in his situation, than I did in the past. Much better than where he was last year.
Oh, man, this is going to make me fall in love with gadget players even more now. Guys like Lynn Bowden that can go, like, hey, he's a wide receiver this week because we only have 3 wide receivers. He's a running back next week because we only have 2 running backs. Guess what? He's our quarterback. He's our emergency quarterback because David Carr's backup's out, or Derek Carr, whichever one. Now I'm going to fall in love even more with gadget guys, man. It's like the utility player in baseball and fantasy. Like, I always fall for that guy because I'm like, look, I can play him at 38 different positions. It doesn't even matter if he's good at any of them. I just need him to play.
Yep.
So, I'm loading up on running backs. I guess I'm loading up on gadget guys, although there's not. I was already loading up on guys like Anthony McFarland and Lynn Bowden anyway. I guess I'll have to just make sure I add Ty Montgomery to that mix too.
Yeah, you mentioned tight ends. I actually think this year in a non-2 tight end league, just our normal tight end, most of our leagues are, I think, 1 tight end premium of some sort. I don't think a lot of people are going to roster a lot of these backup tight ends. And it's because it's a lot more, it's a lot muddier after the top 30 or so. There's a ton of random names out there. You're going, I ask you right now, Shane, who's going to be the Chiefs backup tight end? Can you tell me?
That's good old Ricky Seals-Jones.
It is, but they also have Deion Yelder.
They do have Deion Yelder. Yeah.
So that's one of those where I love Ricky Seals-Jones, but I can't tell you 100% it's going to be him. It could be either one. Now, it would be a desirable position to have whatever one was, quote unquote, the backup if Travis Kelce wasn't playing. But I'm not willing to hold both of them at this point, given the scarcity of roster spots. I'd rather use 2 spots on a quarterback and a running back, let both of those guys go to waivers. So that would be one of those where if something happened to Kelce, I'd have to seek out the one that I thought would be the backup. But I don't want to roster both. I think that's going to be very, very common this year where, some of these teams that have 4, 5, 6 tight ends, there's no point in trying to pick who the backup is unless you can clearly delineate who it's going to be. So I actually think there's going to be more streaming availability. You remember last year when every Jaguars tight end went down?
Yeah.
And it was they were down. I mean, there was 4 starters in 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And it was just who's the next one up? And they kept getting picked up on waivers. Then they'd get hurt. Then they'd go out. I can see that being a more common thing this year, because I don't think the tight end depth charts after the starters are ever crystal clear. So
no. And honestly,
I'm not as worried at rostering backup tight ends. I'll let those go to waivers and just pick them up when they come out.
And if you are going to, like you were saying, if you're going to target a tight end, just target one from an offense that one is high powered. I hate that cliche, but a high scoring one, and one that actually targets the tight end. So, Cleveland, even though they weren't, I don't believe, a high scoring offense last year, I know they're going to target the tight end. So if, I'm going to pick up Austin Hooper, or not pick up, he's sitting on waivers, but after Njoku, you know what I mean? They have one of the Bryant kids, either Hunter Bryant or Bryant Hunter, whichever one that went undrafted, whichever one they ended up with. Pick him up. They like tight ends there if you're going to target a tight end. But yeah, like you said, Kansas City, grab their tight end. Look at the other offenses that target the tight ends a lot. Maybe not the Eagles, because they need about 14 tight ends to go down before, they reach that next level one. I don't even know who their third string tight end is. I couldn't even tell you right now if you put a gun to my head. But you can go online and look that stuff up, people. I don't have to know everything for you.
Yeah.
But other than that, now I'm not going to – I usually am really heavy at tight end too, because, look, usually there's just athletic monster freaks at the tight end position, and I get enamored with that. And I'm like, I need this guy that's 6'5", that runs a 4.4, because if he ever gets the shot – so I'm usually really heavy at tight end. So that is one place where I can just cull it. Like if you're on a bad offense, if you're the Jaguars tight end after Tyler Eifert, and I think not Dawson Knox, is the other guy.
Josh Oliver.
Yeah. After those two, you know what? If it's not one of those two, I'm just going to say, you know what? I'm going to stay away from a Jags tight end. I don't care if he's sitting on the waiver wire.
Well, I mean, and you have some of these situations like Washington. They have Jeremy Sprinkle, Thaddeus Moss, Caleb Wilson, Logan Thomas. I can't tell you who the starter is going to be. So if you want to try to pick, you either kind of got to roster all of them, or three of them, or none of them. So you have to determine, like, do I really want to use three roster? I have a couple leagues where I literally have three Washington tight ends, and I'm sitting there going, that's two roster spots that I'm probably going to be able to free in like 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Once it shakes out, I'm going to know which ones to drop. And there's a couple others like that. Like Houston is another one. Jordan Akins is out there on a lot of waiver wires. But then it's like, well, they also have Jordan Thomas and Darren Fells and Kahale Warren. So are they really going to use 4 tight ends? So, I mean, those situations, I'm kind of better off letting them all fall to waivers, let people roster the ones that they want. And I'll pounce on maybe the guy that gets the opportunity that's sitting on waivers, whoever it is that isn't desirable of those groups. So tight end, I'm actually fine with kind of punting a little bit outside of the guys I know for sure are going to be on the field week 1, because I do think there's going to be some There's going to be some guys that come out of nowhere. It doesn't mean they're going to be any long-term assets, but I do think there's going to be some week-to-week streamability from some of these back-end guys that we never anticipated. I mean, look at Caden Smith last year. Not even a good athlete, terrible athlete, and he was usable for a couple weeks. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of those this year. But I don't want to waste roster spots on those, because very rarely do they have long-term dynasty value.
Right. Usually for every position, but even the tight end, you could just sit on guys. I'm going to let this guy sit on my roster for 2 years. They never hit, whatever. Pharaoh Cooper. I'm just going to keep him there because his phenom score was off the charts. It was. I remember it was 4 years ago when he came out. Like, this guy's a great sleeper. I'm just going to hold on to him. And you might have, held on to him for 3 years. Now it's time to just move on. Though.
He's a terrible receiver. He's been on like 6 teams. He's literally, if you have to play him at receiver, it's bad shape for you.
And I don't even know what team he's with now at this point. But the Rams didn't want to use him. Nobody wanted to actually use him at receiver. He's a fine punt returner, though, I believe. So if you're in a league with punt return scoring, know your settings. Hold on. It's going to be super interesting. This year is going to be unlike anything. And if anyone is willing to, I guess, look, you're going to have to make a decision early on too. Like, am I going to try to win it all in this weird, crazy season, or am I going to try to flip everything for future assets? And I guess, luckily for guys like us that are in too many leagues, hundreds, when you put it together,
it is over 100 combined, which is scary.
You can at least differentiate between different leagues. I think I can make a run in this league, so forget the future. I'm trying to win this year, knowing that can blow up in your face, knowing that, like, you went for it all, and then 4 of your guys got COVID in week 13, so see you next year, or week 14. But at some point, you're going to have to bear down and go, just what do I want to do in this league? Am I okay with flipping Caden Smith for second rounder? Because, he's a tight end 1 this year, because Evan Ingram's down again. And, 18 other tight ends are down. So he's a tight end 1. Am I okay with riding this out, knowing that next year, this guy's going to be worthless? There's going to be so many guys that are like that, the Timmy Hightower, corollary from a few years ago where, look, I could flip this guy right now for rookie picks, or I can ride this guy to a title, or at least attempt to ride him to a title. And there's no wrong answer there. Like me, I like winning titles, so I'm just going to flip every asset I can and worry about next year, to be quite honest with you, unless I'm in a league where it's obvious that I have no shot, regardless of COVID, no matter what COVID does to the rest of the NFL and the rest of my league mates.
Well, let's bring a little strategy into this, because if everyone listened to our episode last week, we talked about the value of draft picks. And one thing we mentioned was, I think this year you're going to see players during the season. There's going to be a shift to where players that are healthy, active, scoring points, that's going to be more valuable this year than in prior years. So you're going to see random players throughout the year that are simply just going to attain trade value, even if it's a third-round pick. Just simply because, hey, that guy's healthy. He's playing every week. Like, I can put him in my lineup and he's not out. He hasn't been on the COVID IR for the last 4 weeks. So, I mean, guys that you would have never thought had any dynasty value that are kind of just like roster cloggers that most years, the end, those guys. After your season is over, Shane, you go through and click on your roster and you're going, oh, Danny Amendola. Like, should I just drop him? Like, he's worthless. No one ever is going to want him. I'm sure there's going to be a point where I'm going to go, man, I want to trade for that 4th rounder and add that player, and I need a roster spot. And that's going to be the guy you cut. So I might as well just cut him now. Because, I mean, that's how I am. I'm OCD, and at the end of the season, I'm going, does this guy have any value? No, I'll cut him and worry about it later. This year, I think those type of players could actually find some value during the season. So I'm going to pose this example to you, because you brought this up at the very beginning of the show. Let's just call it like FFPC rosters, right? 20-man rosters during the season. There's value on the waiver wire, right? Wouldn't you agree? There's usually some players that are valuable on the waiver wire. So that's the first thing. If you understand that, and you understand what positions are scarce, and this doesn't have to be FFPC exactly, but if you understand what we just talked about, the scarce positions are quarterback and running back, in my opinion. Those are the 2 positions where I want basically everybody with a pulse on my rosters. Receivers, I usually have enough to cover receivers because there's so many of them. And tight ends, after the starters, it gets real murky. So I don't want to use a lot of spots on that. But I think you can understand that if you do have like an FFPC situation where you're sitting on a player that let's just say your 19th or 20th guy on your team, right? And all of a sudden, he's going to start for a week. You know he's in line to get 20 carries. Understanding your format, you can automatically seek out to trade that player, knowing I can probably replace that value on the waiver wire. Like I literally can pick up 80% of that value just off the waiver wire. Yeah. So give me the free pick because I'm kicking my investment into the future. So I mean, is that something that how do you manage that during the season, where a guy is a flip, he's going to be worthless in 2 weeks. If I can flip him for even half of what he's worth, I can pick somebody off the waiver wire. How do you determine that? How do you do that math in your head?
Thinking it through always, because I'm always thinking it through like this. Well, if I trade this player that's only worth really a 4th rounder, but I get a 2nd rounder for him, that means the player that I'm replacing him with is a 2nd rounder, which is obviously a better player. And then, the following year, if the 2nd rounder hits, if I can replace him with a 1st round pick and a 1st round player who's obviously got a higher rate to hit, well, then eventually you see your team is going to be full of 1st rounders in theory. We know guys will bust and things happen. And just thinking through guys that we thought were going to hit last year that got the opportunity, Ty Johnson, who I loved in the preseason. And then as soon as he got the chance, crapped all over himself and lost his job to like 15 other running backs. Wayne Gallman, he was going to win leagues for people. And it seems to be more often than not, those guys don't end up giving you the production you thought you were going to get anyway. So you are better off just selling them. And it's a hard thing to do, to tell yourself, this guy's probably not going to hit, because I think as humans, we're probably hardwired to think how things are going to go right, how they're going to go the way we want them to. This guy's going to get 20 touches. He's going to, he's obviously going to get at least 100 yards, probably get a touchdown. He might even get 4 receptions in there. When it's probably going to happen, he's going to get 20 rushing attempts for 63 yards, no touchdowns, and no targets. And then the next week, he's not going to have a job. And you lost any value, any leverage you had in trading him. So the move is going to be, and the move always should be, even in regular season is not COVID related. Flip the guys that are outliers that are hitting when they shouldn't be, because they're not going to keep doing it. Flip the guys that don't, have short-term value. If I know Tony Pollard, who I know everyone loves, Tony Pollard starting for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or even 5 weeks, hell, he might be starting for the rest of the year because Zeke is out. Flip him for everything you can get. Because guess what? Zeke's coming back the next year, and you know what Tony Pollard's going to be? He's going to be a bench fuller. He's going to be a guy that could have been again, and everyone will fiend over about what he used to be and what he could have been. But Zeke's back. Zeke's not, Zeke's going to take 90% of those carries. So the smart move is always to flip those guys. It's almost always to flip those guys. Now, if it's week 16 and it's your championship week, okay, screw that. Go for the title. I get that. But during the regular season, non-playoffs, or if it's not the last week of the year and you need a win to get in, you got to flip those guys.
Well, and I'll give you a couple of examples of exactly what you said. Being the former Eagles fan that you are, 2 years ago, there was an Eagles running back. You probably remember him, Josh Adams, undrafted free agent. I had so many shares. He was one of my pet projects, picked him up everywhere that I could. I track all my shares. I was double-figure shares of Josh Adams. And then lo and behold, what happened? Jay Ajayi got hurt, and he stumbled into some opportunity, and it was like the Eagles are going to give him a legitimate chance. And he had a couple games where they gave him legitimate work. And I could have gone in and flipped Josh Adams for a pick or fab or a pick upgrade or something somewhere in every one of those leagues. And I traded a couple, but I sat on it going, you know what? I'm telling myself this story where they really like this guy and he's the next, I don't know, Jordan Howard, right? Where he's just a guy that's going to be able to command some sort of touches in a given week for the future. And where's Josh Adams now? He's like the 5th running back on the Jets. Probably not even going to make the roster. So, I mean, that's an example. And I'm running into the same thing. DeAndre Washington, I love the guy for 4 years. Damian Williams opts out. What happens? I'm sitting on 17 DeAndre Washington shares. So, Shane, what do? The problem with it is this. I think there's a really good chance DeAndre Washington could be pretty good this year. But the problem is his highest value, if he goes out week 1, let's say he gets the starting carries, which I think is very possible. He gets the first carries this year for the Chiefs. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. But let's say he goes out and is just terribly unimpressive in his first game with the Chiefs, right? He's still going to be their number 2 or number 3 running back, but the shine is immediately off of him. If he doesn't go out and pop and people see something from him, he's just a guy. He's fine if he's on your team, but no longer are people going, oh man, I'll give you a 2nd rounder. I'll give you a 3rd rounder. You know what I mean? Nobody wants him anymore because they just figure he's nothing special. He's just a guy. So it's almost like, as much as I think his opportunity could be good, what do you do with a guy like that right now? I mean, do you just say, Scott, you have 17 shares, you sell 5 of them for 3rd rounders and just walk away? Or, I mean, what's your thoughts on it? Because there's going to be, I think, tons of situations like that.
And that's some of it's situation dependent. I don't think CEH was ever not going to be the starter there. But man, it's like you said, and I know DeAndre Washington won't look bad though. So use another player that will look bad.
He's a solid, but that's the thing. You get teased by guys that have good profiles or that have been pretty solid in the past. I think he's an NFL player. But there's a difference between an NFL player and worth something in Dynasty. Yeah. He's worth something in Dynasty right now, but the second he takes the field and you're like, dude, he looks nothing as good as CEH.
Yeah, so here's where I would risk holding on to him for a couple of weeks. He's one of those players I'll definitely risk because I think his value he can shoot up to a 2nd. Because Damian Williams, for reasons unknown, shot up to 1st round value. Well, not reasons unknown. He was in a really good offense, and he was a slightly above replacement level player. DeAndre Washington's better than him, much better.
Yeah, you can argue he's as good or a better of a pure prospect player as Damian Williams, right?
Yeah. So hopefully he goes out there in week 1 and he gets at least 10 to 11 touches. We'll see. If CEH gets COVID, well, then it's wheels up. If CEH doesn't get COVID and runs away with the the job and all the touches, well, then you're screwed. You're not trading DeAndre Washington for anything ever again. So it's also, where do I put the valuation? Is it worth losing out on a third? Like when I look at worst case scenario, is it worth holding on to him and losing out on a third? Probably. I know that's not very definitive, but my mindset right now, I think it's probably, because I could see his value still shooting up to a second. And the worst I could see his value dropping to is what, a fourth or nothing, which is basically the same.
I mean, a fourth in a lot of leagues is basically just a roster spot.
Right.
So, right. I mean, yeah, it's.
Although listening to Dynasty and Chill the other night, it didn't dawn on me that we should be trading for fab money too until you mentioned it.
Yeah.
Someone I forget who you said was doing that in all the leagues. But even if I could trade him for fab later on, that's fine too, because like you guys noted, I'm probably going to need some free agency dollars this year as well.
Well, and someone else brought it. You just have to be creative. You have to know your league. You have to know the depth of the rosters. You have to know what people value. But I mean, ideally, I've weighed this decision because I think it's a bigger reflection of just a bunch of examples. But if I sold shares of DeAndre Washington for a third today, what do I expect out of that third? Really, I don't want to have to draft a player with that third, because what's my hit rate with that third? 10% or less? I mean, it's super small, and I have to wait a year before I actually make that third a player. The idea, like we talked about on last week's show, if I can collect a bunch of thirds, well, maybe during the year, instead of banking that DeAndre Washington is going to be that guy that's usable, I can save up 2 third rounders and then buy, the DeAndre Washington from the playoffs in week 14 when I need him and I need a starter. Then I can buy it with 2 thirds there. And I know what I'm buying. I'm buying 1 week of, hey, this guy's going to get 20 touches, or this guy's going to be the starter. So I'm able to almost use it with a little more certainty. So I guess that's the risk is, the guy I did the show with on the Dynasty and Chill Patreon, he said what he would do is trade DeAndre Washington and a third and get a second, because he thought the second would have more equity to be able to actually buy a real usable player during the season, a veteran that no one thinks is worth a first, but a rebuilder may give you a James White for a second or something like that, and you can use him for 8 weeks or something. So maybe get creative like that. But it's just this conundrum, because I think you're going to see this type of example tons of times this year.
Yeah, just make sure you're getting picks back in everything you do. Picks and fab now. That's my new thing. I was always about the picks. Now I need to add fab to the equation. And like you were saying on the show, I don't care if it's $3 every trade. I trade enough that stuff will, build up. I make 5 trades, and before you know it, I'm going to control 15% of the fab budget of the league.
Well, and you know what? You never know when that big waiver wire move could happen, where there's that one guy on waivers that all of a sudden his value goes from worthless to, oh my gosh, everyone needs him. If it's a Monday and waivers run on Wednesday morning, I'd rather be the guy that has all the fab. Force the league mates to go in and trade for it, because at that point it's really hard to trade for. Once everyone knows why you're trading for it, good luck trying to get somebody's fab. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, give me your second rounder, I'll give you some fab. Well, no, but now you can get, $10 thrown into a deal. And I bet you if people sent you deals with 10 fab, you're not going to let that be a deal breaker to get what you want. You know what I mean?
Nope.
You're just going to send it over. So yeah, it's a savvy move.
And that's the beauty of the 4th round picks and the 3rd round picks. Usually those aren't breaking a trade, but they'll help facilitate a trade for you all the time. That's right. Those players, the players you select there never have much value, any value really. But it's just that extra currency that you need to acquire and you need to bank.
Let me ask you this. Would you sell your 4th rounders right now for fab?
Yes.
And just say, hey, give me 20 fab, I'll give you a 4th.
Yeah.
Especially if it's like $100 fab budget, where like 20 is like 20% of your budget. That's pretty big.
Yeah. I honestly guess, because I'm all about the flexibility, and fab's even more flexible than picks at this point. And I can use that every week. I can use that as many times as I want to until it runs out. I get to use that pick once, So definitely, I like that move. You're a smart man. This is why we get to do this show together.
Here's the one takeaway from this show. Everybody that watches this and makes a trade for a 4th and they get fab back, tag Shane on Twitter.
Oh, definitely. I love, and make sure you tag like
every other fantasy analyst as well.
Yeah, at least try to tag at least 15 other analysts. Just ask them their opinion, because that's my favorite thing. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, anything else for this week's show?
That's all I got. We almost came in under 30 minutes. I'm proud of us. We stayed on point today. We got a new theme song. Let us know what you think, or don't, whatever. Make sure you watch the video repeatedly and share it with your friends and family. It's good for kids.
Yep, at Charles Chill FFB, at Shane is the worst, Dynasty and Chill, Dynasty Trades HQ. Let us know if you have any ideas for future shows. We're going to come at this consistently every single week before the season, and then we'll see what the seasonal schedule looks like. Shane and I only have about 100 things to do every single week from a fantasy perspective during the season, so we'll see how consistent we are. But thanks for listening. Check out DLF, all the information below. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, and then at DLF Football on Twitter. Catch you guys next week.